And we'll now be shifting to a scenario exploration exercise. So before our session, our speakers were asked to reflect on 3 potential scenarios for AI futures. We'll first give a quick run through of the scenarios, and then you'll hear from our speakers, each responding to one of the scenarios. So we have 3 different scenario vignettes that we'll be discussing, and these are illustrations that we hope will help stimulate reflection and discussion, though keep in mind these aren't predictions. And the presenters will respond to the scenarios to elaborate on the opportunities, challenges, and potential governance responses. And then we'll follow that with a Q&A and some concluding remarks. So the first scenario that we've asked speakers to consider is one in which advanced narrow AI systems enable hyper-efficiency and enforcement. So in this scenario, AI solutions are mainstreamed in public services and businesses around the world. This leads to huge efficiency gains and also leads to rules and regulations of all kinds being enforced automatically using AI systems. So to kind of envisage this scenario, you could think of local authorities enforcing traffic rules using AI systems, online platforms having complex community rules that can be enforced instantaneously by AI systems, companies that enforce their own internal policies and govern workers with these systems, and also automated decision processes for government services, anything from hospital triage to welfare payments to parole decisions. So that's the first scenario. The second one is one that we call AI assistance for everyone. And so this is more focused on advances in increasingly general AI systems like large language models, and that these large language models, there we go, we're up on the screen, are able to perform a wide range of tasks for their users. So firms and families optimize and coordinate schedules seamlessly with these systems. They can nudge individuals towards more healthy behaviors and habits, helping direct their media consumption, eating, personal habits. They can handle things like finances, tax, purchases, but at the same time, sometimes some of the issues that Stuart raised might emerge, like the systems maybe commit fraud on behalf of the user or some other activity that wasn't intended as part of their behavior, but emerges as a behavior. And similarly, the AI assistants act as personal lobbyists, so they can be misused to do things like flood a local information ecosystem with restaurant reservations to make sure you get a table wherever you want, mess up the review system, or they for online reviews, or they can be used to flood government consultations with seemingly legitimate content. And then the final scenario we're exploring is one with supercomputer viruses or AI-enabled information warfare. So in this scenario, critical infrastructure is hit by AI-enabled cybercrime with capabilities that are outstripping cybersecurity capacity. So we know that potentially cybersecurity could be strongly enhanced by AI systems, but this is a scenario in which we find that the use of AI differentially benefits the cyber attack. And as some of our previous panelists in the generative AI session discussed, there's also the potential for the production of high-quality mis- and disinformation, in particular disinformation that could use AI bots to sustain realistic ongoing discussions with individuals or even fabricate entire online communities. So those are the 3 scenarios that we'll be discussing. I'll turn back to scenario 1, which was the advanced narrow systems that enable hyper-efficient enforcement. And first up for that, I'll turn to Michael Schönstein.
Thanks a lot. Well, first of all, thanks, Stuart, for the great keynote. I'm really grateful for the scenario exercise here. When we're working with scenarios, we really try and foster that everyone opens themselves up to enter that story or the world that's described in the scenario. And we consider that generally some kind of cognitive stretching exercise, yeah? So mental flexibility is really the objective, and not predictions or forecasts. So please see my comments in that spirit, yeah? I find it overall a really interesting scenario, and it's exploring some kind of, I would call, extreme optimization in very narrow domains. What I find plausible is precisely the narrow areas AI is used in this scenario in. And since you stayed so deliberately vague on the time frame, I thought a little more on the medium term than the long term when reacting here, and I find that the narrowness quite plausible. The second striking feature here, I think, is that the scenario describes a very technocentric use of artificial intelligence, and in a way, what can be optimized will be optimized, of course, in a short span of time and in narrow areas. And where I think one could debate that is perhaps it underestimates transaction costs a little bit in the short and medium term, as well as the duration of organizational changes, for example, in businesses that would employ artificial intelligence in such cases. And perhaps the third point I would like to make is the one that strikes me most. I don't want to immediately say that it's unlikely because, you know, cognitive flexibility, right? But I think such a technocentric scenario also implies an epic policy failure. That's the reason I called it technocentric in the first place. I think pretty much every AI strategy, any government body or civil society organization or international body has published focuses on human-centric artificial intelligence. I think a world where maybe a few workers have AI as a tool, but the others have AI as a boss is probably not one that's human-centric. One where triage decisions in hospitals are taken by automated systems is also not very human-centric. So I think and precisely this feature is the one I like most about the scenario, because it gets us to think about a couple of very important aspects, and I think this is really how using scenarios can foster important decisions and important discussions. The first question I think that this raises is what would be a counter movement if that happened? Would everybody in a world that you've described in this scenario really accept the status quo, or would there be some form of pushback, societal, political, in whatever form? How would that align with, perhaps polarization that might be implicit in this, in the sense of who are the developers and deployers of AI versus who are the ones that are directed and by AI. I think this is something very important, also going back perhaps to the earlier contributions that we had that emphasized the importance of trust in artificial intelligence. In a scenario like that, what would lead to a scenario like that if simultaneously we say trust is essential for the widespread deployment of artificial intelligence, but then we get this kind of result? I think that's a contradiction that would be very, very difficult to resolve. And nevertheless, I think it also leads back to the point, and I think this alludes a little bit to what Stuart has said about specification. Maybe not everything that's possible is desirable, and we need to think about very carefully how we create governance structures around this. So I think adaptive regulation that can really grow with technological capacities will be very important, perhaps to avoid such a scenario. So that would be my reaction to this one. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. And we'll now hear from Vilas Dhar on the same topic. I believe we're getting him online.
Very good. Good afternoon. Good morning to our global audience. Good evening. Thank you for having me. Michael, thank you for your comments as well. And I will take those maybe one step further and focus on, one, the reality that many of the items described here in these scenarios are currently present, are being developed, are a real reality. And so let me assume that this scenario represents not merely a vision of what's possible, but a direction we'll take, and rely maybe more on the humanities-oriented frame of this as I consider my remarks. I've been recently considering the invisible hand, the metaphor that I think many of us are very familiar with from Adam Smith. I think many are familiar with his work on the Wealth of Nations, but for those who are really interested in wonky, I would recommend the theory of moral sentiments, where he lays out essentially the fundamental theory that has driven our Western economies for 300 plus years, driven 50 plus economics Nobel Prizes and lots of grumpy economists and faculties all over the world. The idea that essentially through voluntary transactions, we create two positive benefits. One, for individuals who are able to, by figuring out how they price things, develop positive signals about what is valued in our economy, where we should invest, where we should further develop. And the second, that simply by virtue of allowing these price signals to propagate, we also create a societal and positive benefit by reducing transactional frictions. something, Michael, that you alluded to as well. I posit as I think about a world of hyper-productive AI, that this foundational concept now faces an unprecedented challenge. That the delicate balance between market forces and demands are rendered obsolete when we change the demand side of the equation. Hyper-performative AI drops production costs in the scenario envisioned here. It creates new mechanisms for production that's not indexed to demand necessarily or to supply side constraints, but rather is done because of single actors that find that they have the capacity to do this. For example, local governments saying, you know, our ability to monitor traffic is no longer restricted by the costs of human personnel, police officers, and devices, but rather can be deployed at massive scale and automated to reduce all transactional frictions. The consequences of a shift like this are profound. As productivity soars, we think about things like employment opportunities dwindling. We think about the concentration of wealth and political power that accompanies those who own or are able to control these systems. And we consider the fact that one of the most prominent critiques of the invisible hand has also been one of its most qualifying factors, that it forces a sense of social stability that's driven by this constant tension between supply, demand, and price. Displaced workers might struggle to adapt. We talk about that all the time, but I advise us to move beyond what happens to the short-term displacement of workers and more consider what happens in an economic system where the unit of value that's been used in classical economics for so long, the value of the hour of time of a worker, no longer has meaning in how we price benefit, products, or value. And in a world where those fundamental economic assumptions are being attacked on so many fronts, I think the question for me becomes less about whether this is a technocentric vision and more about whether we have the capacity and tools to, even in a human-centered world, begin to prospectively govern and develop policies for this future that's ahead. I consider that, you know, as we think about government support services or hospitals or precision agriculture, the benefits of hyper-performative AI are obvious and clear, that more people might have access to healthcare services. The governments might more economically efficiently allocate limited pools of welfare capital, or even that, you know, with precision agriculture, we might use less water, we might have higher productivity. In my great view and our work at the McGovern Foundation, focusing on the economic opportunities for assistance farmers all around the world. But through all of this, we have to focus on, I think, a few specific questions. One is a key risk of hyper-performative AI that forces a potential over-optimization. Again, going back to the example of governments that have new tools that focus on making sure that we're extracting every dollar possible from a traffic violation scheme without considering the second and third order effects that it might have on people's behaviors, on their capacities to travel freely, to trust that a government system is actually engineered both for their safety, not merely for revenue generation. And second, I think the consideration that we have to accept that if we are really creating an economic system in which the invisible hand no longer provides us with those kinds of controls on pricing and demand, then there is a possibility here to say that there's a collective action that reinforces the positive benefits of an invisible hand type structure by naming explicitly the kinds of welfare and economic benefits that we're solving for by deploying these systems. That thinking about government services not merely as economic actors, but as ones that promote human dignity and human welfare, and focusing our efforts today on ensuring that we're equipping our policymakers to be able to think about these larger scale questions that move beyond AI regulation and really focus on regulating a world in which AI enables a fundamentally human transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Vilas. And now we'll move on to the second scenario. This is the AI assistants become widespread and increasingly capable in general. And first we'll hear from Francesca Rossi, who I believe is also online.
Hi, yes, hi, thanks. Hi, everybody. Thanks for this opportunity to speak to this audience. I've listened since the start of the event and this very, very important and timely conversation. So when I read about this scenario and I started thinking about it, I have two main comments here. So first of all, as you see, the first two bullet points are about the positive effects of this possible scenario, where there are personal assistance for small firms and families to optimize their operations, and people also nudged towards, better behaviors for their health and for other goals. But I think that we should expand these benefits of this scenario also to AI system that can help people and firms and governments and policymakers, so any societal actor, to make better decisions. So it seems to me that this is even a broader, much broader positive effect of the ability to have this enhanced personal or assistance, not just for individual people, but also for all these actors in society. So policymakers that can better make decisions, more informed decisions about the right policy, considering all the possible consequences or all the possible factors and so on. So that's the first point about the what I think would be the positive effects of this ability to have this enhanced personal assistance. About the other two bullet points, which instead they talk about the risks and the possible negative effects, it ties to me to a very general and widely discussed and worked on topic, which is value alignment. So how do we make these machines that are value aligned? What Stuart calls these assistance game solvers. So how do we make sure that these machines are assisting people or all these other actors that I mentioned in a way that respects some values? And as you may know, one of the values that we've been considering a lot in AI solutions, in AI training, in AI developing and uses is, of course, fairness. We want to detect bias, mitigate it, make sure that AI systems do not make discriminatory decisions or recommendations to humans that will bring to discrimination. So fairness is one of these values that we want these AI systems already in the current scenario, not just in future ones, to be able to comply with, in some sense, to be aligned with. But there are many other values. So to me, it's really very important to devote a lot of effort in understanding what it means to align to some values and what values are relevant to any specific context, whether it's an autonomous machine making decisions or is a machine that should assist human beings, like in this case, human beings and other actors to make better decisions. So in this context of value alignment, of course, as I mentioned, there was fairness, there was privacy, so we have a lot of values that we have already been discussing a lot, but many of these values are, to me, around, they are seeing human beings like in a passive role with respect to the technology. So I don't want to be treated unfairly. I don't want the machine to impact on my privacy rights and so on. So I receive services for the machine. I'm there, and I want my rights respective to some values to be respected. And this is of course part of the picture, but to me it's not the whole picture. To me, for example, for the long-term future that Stuart mentioned about having control on these machines, to me, I don't envision in the long term just that we have control on these machines and that we can switch them off. I envision also a scenario of personal assistant, for example, where we are active, we are agency. We have agency, we are active in our society, and machines can help us improve our agency and grow ourselves, be more aware about ourselves, about our values, and about our agency as individuals and together with everybody else. So to me, really is using machines and defining the developing machines in a way that help human progress. And human progress is not just humans that can switch off a machine if they see that there is a problem. Human progress is something that is independent, defined from machines, and can be supported by machines if we can make sure that they understand this value and it's embedded into them. And this word that I use, embedded, is important for me because there are many technical ways that various companies are trying to achieve value alignment, even in current large language models or other kind of AI systems. But they are kind of filters after the machine has been developed, like reinforcement learning with human or machine feedback, or prompt engineering, or other methods. To me, we need to come up with different methodologies to really embed values in the machines from the start in the process of the developing the machine. So again, I really think that value alignment, but thinking about the important values, not just protection from risks, is really important in this particular scenario, but I think also in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. And I think you've given a lot of great content for Stuart to build on, so I'll pass it over to Stuart.
Thanks. And in fact, you said quite a few of the things I was going to say, and I already said a lot, so I'll try and keep this short. Let me just expand on the last point you made, the fact that AI systems should not just be making us happy, but part of what we want the future to be like is that we ourselves grow, that we become more capable. And I think one of the serious concerns we're going to have to figure out is it actually feasible for the human race to coexist happily and productively and healthily with entities that are in every practical dimension superior to us? And if the answer is no, then those superior AI systems will figure that out. And they will say, okay, bye. It's been nice helping you out and reach the end of the 21st century successfully, but it's time for us to leave, and you humans have got to get on with it by yourselves. Right? I think if that happens, I would be very happy. Right? That would be proof that we got it right, and this would be a good outcome. So let's come back to the individual personal assistant, which is I think a fantastically useful thing. CEOs and presidents have them, and they are expensive and professional and make their lives feasible. But the people who really need them are the people who have 2 jobs and single parents and kids and all the rest, right? They don't have someone to do all this stuff for them. But if they could, it would be fantastic. And it might cost 50 cents a month or something like that, and it would be amazing. In fact, CMU made a video of this, I think, around 1995. They describe what this technology could do for a person's life, and so it was a very aspirational video. And I've been trying to get hold of it. If someone can find it, please flag it. So the problem that's described here, where the personal assistant starts to steal money to make the owner better off financially, which is presumably something the owner wants, and starts makes reservation at 500 restaurants at the same time just so that the owner has somewhere to go for dinner, right? This comes about from a picture that I think doesn't work, which I call in my book, Human Compatible, I call it loyal AI, where you're designing an AI system whose job it is to work for that one person and only considers the interests of that one person. And I know a lot of people who think that what we want is loyal AI and then a bunch of constraints to make sure that it doesn't break the law. And as long as it's loyal and doesn't break the law, everything's fine. But there's nothing illegal about making 500 restaurant reservations, So we're going to have a law to ban that, right? And on and on and on and on and on, right? This is what I call the loophole principle, that if the AI system isn't properly aligned with the way it should be, it's always going to find ways around any attempt to prevent undesirable behaviors. It's pretty simple with taxes. We've spent 6,000 years trying to write tax law, and because people don't want to pay taxes, they find a way around it. The only real solution is that people have to want to pay taxes. So the AI system has to want to do the right thing, not just for the owner, but for everybody, right? Of course, it understands that making those 500 reservations is a pain in the neck for lots of other people who want a table and restaurants who want customers, but it doesn't care because it's loyal to the owner and nobody else, right? So that's a mistake. Loyal AI is a mistake. AI systems need to take into account the interests of everybody, not just the owner. So now the question is, if that's the way you design it, that it treats everyone's interests equally, then why wouldn't it just go off to whatever place on earth it can do the most good? Like, you know, currently maybe in Sudan where they're having a civil war, or in Ukraine or somewhere else like that, where people are dying, and the AI system could be most helpful to humanity if you think about the sum of our interests. That's an unsolved problem. I don't know the answer. I think there needs to be some weighting for the interests of the owner, because otherwise the owner would never buy the AI system in the first place, because it's not going to be of much use to them personally. And so how you work that out, I think this is a very interesting problem in economics, but I think there are solutions. So I think that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stuart. So now we'll move on to the final third scenario, which was AI-enabled cyber attacks and AI-enabled disinformation and misinformation. And first we'll hear from Jack Clark.
Okay, thank you very much. And just aware of time, I'm going to try and be brief so that we can spend time on questioning. You know, when I think of this scenario, and it might be helpful if we could advance the slide, thank you, where we have misuse of advanced AI systems for cyber attacks, I like to think about how we got there. And I view it basically as failures across three distinct buckets. One is resilience, the other is governance, and the other is enforcement. And so I'll cover these in turn and then talk about some ideas for how we could have got ahead of this. So resilience means that today we're making a forecast about future AI systems that are misused to exacerbate cybercrime. Why then are we not sort of investing in systems for cyber resilience and cyber defense on the assumption that this future arrives? You know, but for this scenario to be true, it suggests that we basically failed to make our systems resilient to a changed operational environment and a changed threat environment from AI. On governance, it suggests that we did not manage to accurately see this problem and be able to, in some sense, kind of quantify it and analyze it and have awareness of it such that policymakers were able to take action. For this scenario to come true, it kind of suggests that this scenario must have in some sense gone not widely noticed by policymakers for some period of time. And suddenly one day you've got a massive spate of cyber attacks kind of exacerbated by AI and significant amounts of kind of misinformation and disinformation and phishing. And it all seems very, very surprising to you, and you don't have a governance regime in place. And then finally, on enforcement, it just suggests to me that we failed to upgrade liability regimes for kind of private sector actors who are working to develop and deploy these technologies, and also enforcement regimes to come down on sort of people that misuse this technology and or to pursue criminals who kind of use it for actively illegal purposes. And so now that we've kind of discussed the failures, I'll just outline three ideas in the same buckets for how we could make, deal with this scenario that we're anticipating today. So I'll cover again in order: resilience, governance, and enforcement. On resilience, in the same way that following the kind of COVID pandemic, we've seen a variable response among policymakers of future pandemic preparedness, we might think here about what does AI preparedness look for the kind of wider cyber ecosystem. And that ranges from a variety of things. It ranges from the ability to attribute, sources and attribute images and attribute text on the internet so that you can defend yourself against things like phishing and impersonation. And it also suggests that you need to carry out activities to make your infrastructure resilient to a dramatically improved level of kind of like cyber offense capability and a dramatic proliferation in the number of actors doing kind of dangerous things in cyber, as AI tends to make stuff cheaper and make there be more of it. On governance, a thing that we can do today is we can just start to assess and measure the evolution of the intersection of cyber plus AI. I mean, I read many papers already on Archive and other research repositories where you're seeing people training AI systems, sometimes including language models, to carry out like cyber attacks. So we can just see this today, and it would be possible to start gathering information about it so that policymakers have that awareness and are therefore better able to kind of govern it because they can measure for these qualities and they can think about what they need to do. And finally, on enforcement, we need to be kind of exercising the muscles here more than we currently are. I mean, right now, there are lots of misuses of AI that are starting to happen, and policymakers are only just beginning to start kind of enforcement actions against them. Additionally, when it comes to the normative framework for using cyber plus AI systems, there's lots of work to do there. And we would probably look to things like the Wassenaar Agreement on cyberspace and other like major multilateral policy documents as venues that we could use to start working on this problem and push towards a more sensible enforcement and normative frame. So just in conclusion, I think that this scenario is a very interesting one because it's actually kind of built in. If you look at the underlying technology, we're going to get quite advanced AI systems that can be misused, and due to many of the traits that Stuart Russell and others mentioned, they have a range of like not very nice technical qualities that make enforcement and steering of them hard. And so I'd say for this forecasting exercise, we should really be asking, it's January 2020 for this problem domain. What would we like to have done in January 2020, re-COVID, if we had a time machine? And can we think about the same ambitious approach for AI? So thank you very much. I hope that was helpful.
Thanks very much, Jack. And now we'll move on to a response to the same scenario from Andrea Renda.
Thank you, and thanks also to Jack for having offered already some great considerations. There are many things that have already emerged from the other scenarios. I was wondering as a first question how alternative these scenarios are, or whether they are, to some extent, some of them complementary. The other question is what the time frame would be, because some of this really look as sort of next steps, but not in very far away in the future, but really in what we would call the medium term. And the other first consideration that I have is, indeed, the first scenario, very, very oriented towards efficiency, then would have led me easily with more time in discussing whether actually Adam Smith, in the Theory of Moral Sentiments, is calling for that efficiency. As far as I remember, he postulates that it's justice that keeps societies together in that work. Something that would bring us, towards a different vision of society. But this scenario here is really bad, right? This scenario, the worst thing about this scenario is that actually nobody listened to Stuart. None of the things that Stuart has been asking for. Nothing new, you say. We listen very carefully. We try to convert your wisdom into also when we try to do policies. But anyway, we've failed. Many things have failed in this scenario. And to some extent, the world has gone back to the early days of the internet when there was no control, and digital technologies have not reached that stage of maturity that they have indeed reached a little bit more today. I remember a paper by Carol Rose, I think NYU at the time, 1998, she said, the internet is like Central Park after dark. You can find everything and the opposite, thrills, excitements, and everything like this. In this scenario, there is a lot of noise. There's noise. We have failed to reach to bring in these countervailing forms of control, education, awareness, filters, technologies that avoid the spread of disinformation. The structural advantage of attack over defense in cybersecurity has led to the impossibility of running critical infrastructures through digital technologies. And so basically we are actually reducing the value of digital technologies. We are reducing the value of the internet and all the digitally enabled infrastructure and all the other parts of our life that we try to enhance through digital technologies, including artificial intelligence. So the big dividend that Stuart was talking about before in this scenario doesn't materialize at all. And at least in the snapshot that we're given here, governments and private sector that is managing this infrastructure has to pull the plug and keep the infrastructure on paper, if you wish, or manually, mechanically run critical infrastructure, because there is no possible trustworthiness in the digital means that could potentially redeem the situation. So it is, in my opinion, not a stable scenario for a couple of reasons. First of all, for the path dependency that characterizes the growth of our societies. We have seen the potential advantages of using digital technologies. And so we would probably look for some way in that respect to build resilience in our infrastructure, terms that Jack has also used. But the other reason is that in this scenario, we have completely failed to build or to renew our social contract. The world is full of information that cannot be trusted. There is no way of building in any additional form of, let's say, recognizing the origin or the sources of information. I can see an easy world where we, in the metaverse, build grief bots, right? Or use deepfakes and live in a world where it's completely impossible. And this is a situation that was described earlier today, to distinguish what is reality and what is its representation, what is a loyal representation, and what is actually a manipulated type of information, or what is an intentionally manipulated information. So what I would expect in this respect is, in this case, is first of all the development of technologies of resistance, meaning within the digital environment, the emergence of innovation and technologies that shield individuals. So perhaps the personalized AI assistants that we see in scenario 2, but also perhaps the use of distributed ledger technologies to increase the traceability of information. This is something that could potentially happen in a world that otherwise becomes an AI versus AI, as largely this information already is. I would expect political groups to advocate different visions of society, because obviously there is this memory of the past where technology was deploying some benefits that will loom over anyone who continues to propose the status quo. So one way or another, a better digital world or a non-digital world will start to be proposed in political terms. I could go on with developments, but I'll cut it short. But I think there is a potentially silver lining in this scenario, not for AI, but potentially for humans. And this I relate to one thing that I've been recently studying a little bit more in depth, because I was curious about what generative AI could do to us and in the future, which is what happened to painters when photography emerged, right? You are normally considered as a good painter if you can reproduce reality, if you have dexterity and mastery in reproducing reality in an image. Then photography comes, and that is commoditized to some extent. And so since then, the contours get blurred, like the Impressionists, or sometimes you get shades of colors. Rothko, the canvas, the paint thrown at the canvas, Jackson Pollock, and so on and so forth. And you end up in a situation in which art is much more in the subjective intent of those that generated a piece of work, rather than in the objective aesthetics and the ability to reproduce an image as it was before. So my wonder is, in a situation like this, I think humans could come up with something else that could actually be different from digital and different from AI, that would lead to a different path. So who knows, maybe it's actually one of the best scenarios that we could think of. Thank you.
Thanks very much for those really interesting thoughts. On the nice positive note, I'm now going to take us to a discussion question. And the question that I'd like to ask is trying to get speakers to engage in some blue sky thinking. So nothing is out of play here. If it was before, it's now in play. But But if you could wave a magic wand and make one change today to help ensure beneficial futures for humans when it comes to AI, what would it be and why? So we're running a little behind time, so I think probably aim for a couple of minutes per response if you can. I know it's a pretty rich topic, but we'll see how we do. So I'll first turn to Stuart.
So in the interest of time, I'll just say a global recognition of the human right to know whether you're interacting with a human or a machine.
Well, that certainly wins for conciseness. I'll turn to Francesca now.
Yes, so as an AI researcher, I think I would love to find the best way to, as I said, embed values, the right kind of values in a machine. I don't think we are there yet, and I think that's deeply needed. As somebody that also engages in these global discussions, I think that I would like to see a much more collaborative, global, and proactive way of defining what is the future that we want with the technology, supported by technology and AI. Thanks.
Thanks very much. And Michael?
I would second Stuart and add to that a skills and capacity shock for government so they can actually enforce new rights.
Thank you. And now on to Vilas.
I love these 1- and 2-liners. My sense is we're at the beginning of a profound shift in these conversations, moving from people who think about AI governance, AI responsibility, and AI ethics to the remainder of society thinking about how the world is going to be changed because of AI, and moving responsibility, ethics, and transparency into how we build public-facing policies on labor, finance, participation, and equity is really where we need to get to quickly.
Thank you. And now back to Andrea.
The best thing that AI can do to humans, well, apart from the answer, magic wand, people listen to Stuart, okay. But apart from this, the two best things that AI can do for humans, in my opinion, are explaining to us or helping us find the explanation of what is in between relativity physics and quantum physics. There is something in between or beyond that we can understand. And second, helping us understand how our brain works. And this I actually am not sure, because if we need artificial general intelligence to help us understand how our brain works, or whether AI can help us understand, narrow AI can help us understand how our brain works. In both cases, maybe what happens is if AI helps us understand how our brain works, then we can use our understanding of how our brain works to build artificial general intelligence. But that, contrary to my previous statement, is a very dystopian scenario.
Thank you. And Jack?
I'd say using AI to monitor and understand the progression of AI, because we have thousands of papers being published every week now, and we actually might need to use AI to help us understand where this train is going.
That's a good endorsement of some of the hopeful work with the AI Incidence Monitor at the OECD. So I think that concludes the formal questions that we had. We're now going to take a quick look at the poll results from the poll that we gave at the beginning. So let's zoom in there. It seems like people don't think governments are particularly prepared for emerging risks from AI systems. There's at least two people who agree.
There's two government policymakers who can't figure out the right button to press. It's too complicated.
So I think there's a good endorsement that there's a role for groups like this. And I think now, due to the extreme concision from our panelists, we now, in fact, have time for 1 or 2 questions from the floor.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Andrea, you already mentioned the role of the social contract. If I take this one step further, a social contract for the digital space that, for example, specifies certain responsibilities for digital behavior that we have, and maybe also the technology to support us in exhibiting those social behaviors. Maybe you can expand a little bit on that, what that could look like in a positive scenario. Thank you.
I'll be very brief, but of course we can continue this. For me, a digital social contract that is sustainable goes beyond the dualism government, regulator regulated, but empowers not only individuals but also civil society in looking into technology. We see some traces of this, for example, Digital Services Act and the possibility for vetted researchers to observe and inspect algorithms to perform systemic risk assessments. I don't think governments will have the resources and the ability to catch up with technology all the time. We need an empowered civil society and algorithmic literacy among individuals to the extent possible. So this four-pillar society, I think, is the basis for building a future social contract. And there's much more than that, but we'll continue the conversation bilaterally, probably.
Thank you. My name is Marco Alexander Breit. I'm Deputy Director General in the German Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. I'm responsible for AI, data, and tech. And I'm coming from the negotiations on the EU AI Act, which a lot of people in the room share with me. And the discussion added like a bazillion of layers of complexity to these regulatory questions. And to be honest, while I do not really fear these scenarios 2 and 3, because Andrea, you said already that these are complementary. It's like an arms race. The AI that helps us versus the AI that doesn't help us, it tries to actually harm us. So in the end, this is fine. We will solve that. But when we should address, as governments, as the EU, as a global community, and you talked about civil society, yeah, enforcement is the problem. And the civil society is not actually really good at enforcement. Governments are best at enforcing things, and I really have a problem with seeing enforcement on a global scale. Are there any comments that can keep, that can help us addressing these questions on a global scale? That would be my question.
I can quickly comment. Well, civil society can be very useful at enforcement, in my opinion. We can continue the conversation. Second, I see the future of enforcement as, again, an AI-enabled future. We have some examples in some sectors already, from the UK, but also the EU already, when we talk about subtech. The establishment of a secure data exchange between the regulated and the regulated entity, so a constant flow of information that has to be carefully selected as regards compliance behavior, and the application of anomaly detection to some extent and AI solutions to detect in real time whether the expected behavior is actually changing. So that is one of the RegTech or GovTech tools that are being explored. I see in the future this is an enormous area for those that study public policy.
And I'll just invite any of the other panelists to speak on this topic of AI regulation, AI enforcement, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's a huge problem, and we're falling down already. For example, in the US, it's a violation of federal law to call somebody on the do not call list using a machine. But most people I've talked to get 5 to 10 calls a day. So that adds up to about 1 trillion federal crimes per year. And last time I checked, no enforcement actions. So it's pretty out of control.
So my common question, right, would be, so remember we met in Canary Islands, like in December, right? So this was like a week after, or a week or two after ChatGPT appeared, right? It was already a good percentage of all the discussion. Now we are like, what, 5 months after? It's pretty much most of the discussion just about this. Now, well, if I would be provocative, can you well, you have Foresight, right? The crystal ball guys, right? What will be after summer kind of discussion? Okay, I could hypothesize what will be. I think pretty much what we have now, it's pretty much a toy, right? When we'll start really filling this AI, I don't know, generative AI, ChatGPT, and so on, when all the IT systems, including Office and browsers and the rest, will be integrated with this. And this is already running, as you know, it's just that we don't have it yet on our desktops. So this will be quite an acceleration on that front. And maybe we don't even need GPT-5, right, for a while, because there will be so much consequences just based on integration between more traditional tools and what we have now, this GPT-4, right? But yeah, still the question remains. So what we'll be discussing? I expect somehow that we will look at good old times like April 23, when things were still simple, right? But maybe some projections from your side.
Well, in the tradition. Sorry.
Yeah, I think we have already the right awareness in the policy landscape, I think. But what we need probably, I mean, this is my humble opinion, is that the policy consideration and, and regulations, etc., need to be empowered by technological solutions. In fact, we need observability, we need traceability, we need to control the beast, in fact. And when we talk about embedding our values, I mean, if this generative AI have been built by design with these principles, in fact, we will not be discussing these kind of topics here. Why? Because there is not yet mature technology to make it happen. So embedding values, for example, fairness by design, it is optimizing, objective function with constraint, okay? The constraint will be the definition of fairness in your business situation. So we need to make it more concrete and to empower, in fact, these all, policy considerations, which are definitely very important, but to make it concrete and to make it really operational and implementable on Earth and in systems and products, we need this more connection, in fact, between tech and policy in a very, very interdisciplinary way. This is my 2 cents.